Commander Vexthal stood at the viewport of the transport shuttle, watching the human vessel grow larger against the black emptiness of space. His four eyes narrowed with barely hidden contempt. The ship was called the Endeavor, and it looked like a fragile thing compared to the warships of the Karate Empire. Its hull was thin. Its weapons were small. Everything about it seemed weak. Vexthal had lived for 300 cycles, which was considered middle age among his people. In that time, he had fought in 47 military campaigns across 12 different star systems. His body told the story of those wars. Deep gouges marked his chitinous exoskeleton where enemy blades had struck. Burn scars from plasma weapons covered his left shoulder plate. One of his mandibles had been broken and had healed at a crooked angle. A reminder of hand-to-hand combat with a Reknal berserker. Among the Karathi, Vexthal was considered a living legend. He had never retreated from battle. He had never surrendered a position. He had never lost a campaign under his command. Young warriors spoke his name with reverence, and enemy commanders spoke it with fear. The Galactic Council had recognized him with 17 different medals for valor and tactical excellence. So when the Council assigned him as a military liaison to the human species, he felt insulted. The humans were new to the galactic community. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel about 100 years ago, which was nothing in the long history of spacefaring civilizations. They came from a small planet called Earth, in a remote corner of the galaxy. Most species had never even heard of them until recently. Vexthal had read the basic files on humans before accepting this assignment. What he learned did not impress him. They were soft creatures with no natural armor. Their skin could be cut by simple blades. They had no claws, no venom, no natural weapons of any kind. Their eyesight was average at best. Their hearing was limited. They could not see in the dark without technology. They could not survive in extreme temperatures. They needed to eat multiple times every single day just to keep their bodies running. By every measure that mattered to a Karathi warrior, humans were weak. The shuttle docked with the Endeavor, and Vexthal walked through the airlock with his head held high. He expected to find a crew of soft beings playing at being soldiers. He expected to spend a few boring months observing their primitive military practices before returning to real work with his own people. Captain Danny Reyes was waiting for him in the docking bay. The human was shorter than Vexthal by nearly a full head. His skin was brown and smooth, without any protective covering. His eyes were small, and he only had 2 of them. He wore a simple uniform that offered no armor protection at all. By Karathi standards, he looked completely helpless. But Danny smiled at Vexthal with genuine warmth and extended his hand. "Commander Vexthal, welcome aboard the Endeavor. We are truly honored to have you with us." Vexthal looked at the extended hand with confusion. A Karathi officer had explained human greeting customs to him before the journey, so he understood what the gesture meant. He reached out and gripped Danny's hand, being careful not to crush the fragile human bones with his armored fingers. The handshake was firm, stronger than Vexthal had expected. "Thank you, Captain," Vexthal replied. His translator device converted his clicking speech into sounds humans could understand. "I am here to observe and learn about human military capabilities." Danny nodded. "And we hope to learn from you as well. A warrior of your experience has much to teach." Vexthal clicked his mandibles in acknowledgement, but inside he felt nothing but skepticism. What could these creatures possibly teach him? He had been fighting wars since before their great-grandparents were born. Danny led him through the corridors of the ship, introducing him to various crew members along the way. Vexthal observed everything with a critical eye. The ship was clean and well-maintained, he had to admit. The crew members moved with discipline and purpose. But they were all so small, so fragile-looking. He met the ship's doctor, a woman named Maria Santos. She was tiny, with dark hair and quick hands. She explained the medical facilities to him and mentioned that humans healed slowly from injuries compared to many other species. This confirmed what Vestal already suspected about their weakness. He met the chief engineer, a large man named Greg Palmer. Greg was bigger than most humans Vestal had seen, with thick arms and a loud laugh. He seemed proud of the ship's engines and weapon systems. Vestal noted that the technology was adequate but nothing special. He met the Marine commander, a woman named Kate Molina. She was lean and hard-eyed, with scars on her hands and a quiet intensity in her voice. Something about her reminded Vestal of Karathi soldiers, though he dismissed the thought as ridiculous. By the end of the tour, Vestal had formed his opinion. The humans were organized. They were disciplined. They clearly took their military seriously, but they lacked the physical advantages that made truly great warriors. They would never survive real combat against a serious enemy. That night, Vestal sat alone in his assigned quarters, writing his first report to the Karathi High Command. He described the ship, the crew, and his initial impressions. He concluded that humans were a minor species with limited military potential. He recommended minimal investment in any alliance with them. Before he slept, he looked out his window at the stars. He had traveled to hundreds of worlds and fought against dozens of species. He had seen things that would break the minds of lesser beings. He was Vestal, the undefeated, the unbroken, the legendary. These humans had nothing to teach him. He was certain of this. Completely certain. But certainty, as Vestal would soon learn, was a fragile thing, and humans had a way of breaking things that seemed unbreakable. The days that followed would change everything he thought he knew about strength, about courage, and about what it truly meant to be a warrior. He simply did not know it yet. For now, he slept soundly, wrapped in the comfortable armor of his own assumptions. The humans went about their duties, unaware that they were being judged and found wanting by an alien who had seen more war than they could imagine. Neither side knew what was coming. Neither side was prepared for the lessons that would be taught and learned in the weeks ahead. But the universe has a way of teaching lessons whether beings are ready for them or not, and Commander Vestal was about to receive an education that would shake him to his very core. 2 weeks passed aboard the Endeavor, and Vestal began to notice things that confused him. It started with small observations. He watched the crew during their daily routines and saw things that did not match his understanding of weak species. The humans worked long hours without complaint. They trained hard in their combat simulations. They pushed their bodies in ways that seemed unnecessary for beings so fragile. One morning, Vestal observed a training exercise in the ship's combat bay. A group of Marines were practicing close-quarters fighting techniques. Among them was a young man named Pete Callahan. He was average-sized for a human, with red hair and a face full of small brown spots that humans called freckles. He moved fast and hit hard, and Vestal noted that he had some skill. Then something went wrong. During a sparring match, Pete's partner made a mistake with a training weapon. The safety settings failed, and a burst of plasma caught Pete on his right shoulder. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. Pete fell to one knee, his face twisted in obvious pain. Vestal expected the exercise to stop immediately. Among the Karathi, a wound like that would require immediate evacuation to medical facilities. The soldier would be removed from duty for at least 10 cycles while the injury healed. But Pete did not leave. Lieutenant Lisa Vance, one of the ship's medics, ran over with her kit. She was a small woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her hands moved quickly as she examined the wound. It was bad. Vestal could see that the plasma had burned through the uniform and into the muscle beneath. "How bad?" Pete asked through clenched teeth. second-degree burns, maybe some third-degree areas, Lisa replied. You need to go to medical. Can you patch it enough to finish the exercise? Lisa stared at him. Pete, this is serious. I know it's serious. I can feel it's serious. Can you patch it? Lisa hesitated, then let out a long breath. I can do a field dressing. It will hurt like hell. Do it. Vexthal watched in growing disbelief as Lisa cleaned and wrapped the wound. Pete made no sound during the process, though his jaw was tight and sweat ran down his face. When she finished, he stood up, rolled his shoulder to test the bandage, and returned to the training floor. He completed the exercise. Afterward, Vexthal approached Captain Danny Reyes. The human captain was watching the Marines with what looked like pride in his eyes. Does he not feel pain? Vexthal asked. That wound should have incapacitated him. Danny turned to look at the Karathi commander. His expression was thoughtful. Oh, he feels it, Danny said. Believe me, he feels every bit of it. Humans just have a complicated relationship with pain. I do not understand. Danny was quiet for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. Pain is information to us. It tells us something is wrong, but we can choose how to respond to that information. Pete chose to acknowledge the pain and keep going anyway. Vexthal's mandibles clicked in confusion. But why? The exercise was not real combat. There was no reason to suffer. He wants to be ready, Danny said simply. When real combat comes, he wants to know that he can keep fighting even when it hurts. The only way to know that is to practice. This answer made no sense to Vexthal. The Karathi approach to injury was logical and efficient. A wounded warrior was a less effective warrior. It was better to heal completely and return at full strength. Why would anyone choose to suffer unnecessarily? But the question stayed with him throughout the day. That evening, Vexthal found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept returning to the image of Pete Callahan rising from the floor with a burned shoulder, returning to fight. It bothered him in a way he could not explain. He decided to learn more about these strange creatures. The ship had an extensive historical archive, records from human civilization going back thousands of years. Vexthal began accessing these files out of reluctant curiosity. He told himself he was simply doing his job as a liaison, learning about the species he was assigned to observe. He started with recent human history, but soon found himself pulled further and further into the past. He read about their wars, their conflicts, their struggles. He expected to find records of small battles between primitive tribes. Instead, he found something else entirely. He found a war called World War II. At first, he thought the records must be exaggerated. The numbers seemed impossible. Tens of millions dead. Entire cities destroyed. Battles that lasted for months and years. Surely this was propaganda, designed to make humans seem more impressive than they actually were. But the more he read, the more details he found. Personal accounts, official military records, photographs and videos from the time. The evidence was overwhelming. These soft, fragile creatures had survived a conflict of unimaginable scale. He read about a place called Stalingrad. Human soldiers had fought there for over 5 months in conditions that would kill a Karathi in hours. The temperatures dropped so low that weapons froze and stopped working. The humans kept fighting with whatever they had. They fought in the ruins of buildings, room by room, staircase by staircase. They fought even when they were starving, even when they were freezing, even when there was no logical hope of victory. He read about an island called Iwo Jima. Human soldiers had charged fortified positions knowing most of them would die. They climbed hills covered in enemy fire. They watched their friends fall beside them and kept climbing. A single photograph showed humans raising a flag on a mountain of rock that had cost them thousands of lives to capture. He read about something called the Siege of Leningrad. Enemy forces had surrounded a human city and tried to starve the people inside into surrender. The siege lasted for almost 900 days. The humans inside ate leather and glue and things that should not be food. They buried their dead in frozen ground and kept fighting. They refused to give up their city. Vexthal read through the entire night cycle. His eyes grew tired, but he could not stop. Each new record led to another, and another, and another. The scale of human suffering was beyond anything he had imagined. The scale of human endurance was beyond anything he had thought possible. When the morning shift began and the ship returned to full activity, Vexthal was still sitting in the archive room, surrounded by holographic displays of human history. His certainty had developed a crack, and cracks, once they begin, have a way of spreading. Vexthal did not sleep for 3 full cycles. He could not. Every time he tried to close his eyes, his mind filled with the images and words from the human archives. So, he kept reading. He kept searching. He kept finding more. The Karathi were considered the greatest warriors in the known galaxy. They had hard exoskeletons that could stop most weapons. They had 4 arms that could tear enemies apart. They had been bred for combat over thousands of generations. Their entire culture was built around the concept of martial excellence. But the more Vexthal learned about humans, the more he questioned everything he thought he knew about strength. He found records of something called the Bataan Death March. Human soldiers had been captured by an enemy force and forced to walk for days through tropical heat without food or water. Those who fell were killed. Those who tried to help the fallen were killed. The march went on and on, mile after mile, until thousands had died, and yet some survived. They survived and they remembered, carrying the weight of that memory for the rest of their lives. He found records of a human named Ben Salomon. This human had been a dentist, a medical professional who fixed teeth. When enemy forces attacked his position, he picked up a weapon and fought back. He held his position alone while wounded soldiers were evacuated behind him. When his body was found later, he had 98 enemies dead around him and 76 bullet wounds in his own flesh. He had been shot 76 times and kept fighting. Vexthal read this record 3 times. He could not believe it. No Karathi could survive 76 bullet wounds. No Karathi would continue fighting after the first dozen. But this human dentist had absorbed wound after wound and refused to fall until his mission was complete. He found records of a place called the Chosin Reservoir. Human soldiers had been surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces in frozen mountains. The temperatures were so cold that medical supplies froze and became useless. The humans fought their way out through the ice and snow, carrying their wounded with them. They even carried their dead because they refused to leave anyone behind. When they finally escaped the trap, many had lost fingers and toes to the cold. Many had wounds that would never fully heal, but they had survived, and they had done it together. Vexthal found his hands were shaking. He found records of a human named Desmond Doss. This human had been a medic who refused to carry any weapons because of his personal beliefs. During a terrible battle, he saved 75 wounded men by lowering them down a cliff face, one by one, while enemy fire tore the air around him. He was shot and wounded multiple times. He kept going. He kept saving people. When asked later how he did it, he said he just kept praying for strength to save one more. One more. Then, one more. Then, one more. 75 times. Vexthal had commanded thousands of soldiers in his career. He had seen acts of bravery and sacrifice, but nothing in his experience compared to what he was reading. These humans did not have hard shells to protect them. They did not have natural weapons. They bled easily and died quickly. Yet they threw themselves into danger with an abandon that seemed almost insane. And it was not just soldiers. He found records of ordinary humans doing extraordinary things, parents who lifted heavy vehicles off their trapped children, civilians who ran into burning buildings to save strangers, people who gave their own lives so that others might live. The records went on, an endless catalog of sacrifice and endurance. Vestan finally summoned Captain Danny Reyes to the archive room. He needed answers. He needed someone to explain what he was reading. Danny arrived and found the Karathi commander surrounded by floating screens filled with human history. The captain's expression was serious when he saw what Vestan had been studying. "These records," Vestan said. His voice was unsteady. He could hear it wavering and did not care. "They are propaganda, yes? Exaggerations designed to impress other species? Your people have changed the numbers and the details to make themselves look stronger?" Danny walked closer and looked at the screens. His face was calm, but his eyes were sad. "No, Commander. These records are as accurate as we could make them. If anything, they are incomplete. We lost a lot of documentation over the centuries. Wars destroy records along with everything else." "But this cannot be true." Vestan gestured at a screen showing images from Stalingrad. "These conditions would kill any species. No one could fight in such circumstances." "They did fight. They died in enormous numbers, but they fought." "Why?" The question burst out of Vestan with desperate confusion. "Why did they not surrender? Why did they not retreat? Any logical military commander would have withdrawn and preserved forces for another day." Danny was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "Because some things matter more than survival, Commander. Some things are worth dying for." Vestan stared at the human captain. The Karathi valued survival above all else. A dead warrior could not fight. A dead warrior could not protect their people. The highest duty was to stay alive and keep fighting. Everything else was secondary, but humans seemed to believe something different. They seemed to believe that how you lived and how you died mattered as much as whether you survived. "I have fought for 300 cycles," Vestan said slowly. "I have seen terrible things. I have done terrible things. I thought I understood war. I thought I understood courage." He looked at Danny with all four of his eyes. "I do not understand your people at all." Danny nodded slowly. "We don't always understand ourselves, Commander. We just do what needs to be done." He turned and walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. "Get some rest. You look like you need it." Vestan remained in the archive room long after Danny left. He stared at the screens until the images blurred before his tired eyes. The weight of human history pressed down on him like a physical force. He had come to this ship expecting to find a weak species playing at being soldiers. Instead, he had found something else entirely. He had found a species that had looked at impossible odds and said no. A species that had endured suffering beyond imagination and kept going. A species that measured strength not by the hardness of their shells, but by the hardness of their will. And Vestan realized, for the first time in his long life, that he might not know what true strength really was. The distress call came at the worst possible time. Vestan had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep after days of reading human history. The alarm pulled him awake with a harsh sound that cut through his dreams. He stumbled out of his quarters and made his way to the command deck, where the human crew was already moving with practiced efficiency. Captain Danny Reyes stood at the center of the bridge, his face lit by tactical displays. His voice was calm as he issued orders, but there was an edge beneath the calm that Vexthal had not heard before. "What is happening?" Vexthal asked. "Mining colony on the fourth moon of Kelos 7, Danny replied, without looking away from the screens. "Reknal raiders, at least 3 ships. They hit fast and they are killing everyone they can find." Vexthal felt his blood chill. He knew the Reknal. They were considered one of the most dangerous species in the sector. They were fast and brutal, with no mercy and no interest in prisoners. When they attacked, they left nothing but corpses behind. "How far away is the nearest battle group?" Vexthal asked. 6 hours at maximum speed." "And how long until the Reknal finish their attack?" Danny finally looked at him. His eyes were hard. "Less than 1 hour." Vexthal understood the mathematics of the situation immediately. There was no way to call for help. There was no way to wait for reinforcements. The Endeavor was alone, and it was outgunned. The logical decision was obvious. They should withdraw, report the situation, and let a proper military response handle the problem. He expected Danny to make that call. Instead, the captain turned back to his crew and said 2 words. "Battle stations." The ship came alive around Vexthal. Crew members ran to their positions, weapons systems powered up. The engines roared as the Endeavor accelerated toward the danger instead of away from it. "Captain," Vexthal said, "you cannot engage 3 Reknal raider ships with a single vessel. The odds are completely against you." Danny smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Commander, the odds have been against us before." The battle began 20 minutes later. Vexthal watched from the command deck as the Endeavor tore into the Reknal formation. The human ship was smaller than the raiders, but it moved with a speed and precision that surprised him. Danny commanded his crew like they were extensions of his own body, calling out orders that were followed instantly and perfectly. The first raider ship fell within 5 minutes, its hull torn open by concentrated fire. The second ship tried to run, but the Endeavor cut off its escape and disabled its engines. The third ship fought hard, scoring hits on the human vessel that made the deck shake beneath Vexthal's feet. But the humans did not stop. When the space battle was won, the real work began. The raiders had already landed ground troops on the mining colony. Civilians were trapped inside the main facility, held at gunpoint by Reknal soldiers who knew their mission had failed and had nothing left to lose. Captain Danny called for boarding teams. Vexthal followed the Marines to the shuttle bay, unable to stay behind. He had to see this with his own eyes. He had read about human courage in the archives, but reading was not the same as witnessing. The shuttle ride to the colony surface was tense and quiet. The Marines checked their weapons and their armor. They did not speak much, but Vexthal saw something in their eyes that he recognized. It was the look of warriors preparing to die if necessary. Sergeant Kate Molina led the assault. She was first through the breach, her rifle firing before she had even cleared the doorway. The Reknal inside were caught off guard by the speed and violence of the human attack. The fighting was brutal and close. Vexthal had been in countless battles, but he had never seen anything quite like this. The humans moved through the corridors like water, flowing around obstacles and through doorways, covering each other with practiced precision. They took wounds and kept fighting. They saw friends fall and kept fighting. They did not slow down. They did not hesitate. Kate Molina took a blade through her thigh. Vexthal saw it happen. A Reknal warrior lunged from a hidden position and drove its weapon deep into her leg. The blade went completely through, the point emerging from the other side. By Karathi standards, it was a crippling wound. She should have fallen. She should have screamed for a medic. Instead, Kate looked down at the blade, grabbed the handle, and snapped it off. The broken weapon remained in her leg as she raised her rifle and shot the Reknal 3 times in the chest. Then, she kept moving, limping but not stopping, leading her team deeper into the facility. The hostages were in the central chamber. 20 Reknal soldiers held them at gunpoint, using them as shields. Any normal assault would have resulted in massive civilian casualties, but the humans had a sniper named Adam Torres. Adam found a position in the ventilation system, crawling through spaces that seemed too small for any adult being. He set up his rifle and waited for his moment. When it came, he fired through a gap no wider than a human finger, dropping the Reknal commander with a single shot. The other Marines breached at the same moment, and the battle was over in seconds. 11 civilians saved, 0 hostage deaths. After the fighting ended, Vexthal found himself in the medical bay of the Endeavor, watching the wounded being treated. The room was full of injured humans, but instead of cries of pain, he heard laughter. Pete Callahan was there again, this time with burns across his chest, helping Lieutenant Lisa Vance change bandages on another soldier. Kate Molina lay on a bed while a doctor worked on her leg. The wound was severe, and the repair would take time, but she was smiling and joking with her Marines, asking about the others, making sure everyone was accounted for. Vexthal stood in the corner of the medical bay, watching these strange creatures tend to each other. His mind was spinning with everything he had seen and learned. Finally, he spoke. "Why?" His voice came out as barely a whisper. "Why do you keep fighting? Your bodies break so easily. Your lives are so short. Why do you not simply stop?" Kate Molina looked up at him from her bed. Her leg was wrapped in regenerative mesh, and her face was pale from blood loss. But her smile was warm and genuine when she answered. "Because someone has to stand in the gap, Commander, and we have gotten pretty good at it." Vexthal had no response. He simply stood there, surrounded by broken bodies and unbroken spirits, and wondered what else he had been wrong about. That night, after the wounded were treated and the rescued civilians were safe, Vexthal returned to the archive room one final time. He could not sleep. His mind would not let him rest. Something was building inside him, a pressure that demanded release, an understanding that was trying to take shape. He needed to find it. He needed to understand. He searched for records of more recent human history. He found files about something called the First Contact War. The story began 60 years before the present day. A species called the Threll Dominion had discovered Earth. The Threll were conquerors. They had taken dozens of worlds across the galaxy, crushing all resistance with their superior technology and massive armies. When they found the humans, they expected an easy victory. They were wrong. The Threll bombarded human cities from orbit. They destroyed power stations and communication networks. They landed armies on 6 continents, expecting surrender within days. Instead, they found something they had never encountered before. They found farmers with hunting rifles forming militias in the countryside. They found teachers building explosive devices in school basements. They found teenagers running supplies through bombed-out streets while enemy patrols searched for them. They found grandmothers hiding resistance fighters in their homes and lying to Threll soldiers with steady voices. The humans had no starships. They had no advanced weapons. They had no chance, by any reasonable calculation. But they fought anyway. The war lasted 4 years. Vexthal read the accounts with growing disbelief. Human cities fell and the fighting continued. Human armies were destroyed and new ones formed. Human leaders were killed and new ones rose to take their place. Every time the Threll thought they had won, the humans found another way to resist. They fought in the ruins of their cities. They fought in the forests and mountains. They fought in the sewers and tunnels beneath the ground. They used whatever weapons they could find, build, or steal. When they ran out of bullets, they used knives. When they ran out of knives, they used their bare hands. The Threll were a proud species with a long history of conquest. They had never been defeated. But after 4 years of fighting on Earth, they called for peace negotiations. Not because they had won, but because they had calculated the cost of total victory. The numbers were staggering. To completely conquer Earth, the Threll would have lost more soldiers than they could afford to lose. The humans were not defeating them in open battle, but they were bleeding them dry through 1,000 small cuts. Every day brought more casualties. Every victory came at a higher price than the last. One Threll general's private journal was preserved in the archive. Vexthal read his words with 4 trembling eyes. They do not fight like a species trying to survive. They fight like survival itself is optional, and spite is mandatory. Vexthal's exoskeleton locked. It was a physical response that happened to Karathi in moments of extreme shock. Every joint in his body went rigid. His mandibles froze mid-click. His 4 arms became immobile at his sides. He could not move. He could barely breathe. The full weight of understanding crashed over him like a wave. He had spent his entire career believing that the Karathi were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. They had hard shells. They had natural weapons. They were difficult to kill. This was the source of their strength, he had always thought. This was why they were feared. But the humans had no hard shells. They had no natural weapons. They were easy to kill, and yet they were impossible to defeat. Every wound they suffered became a lesson for the future. Every loss became fuel for revenge. Every death became a debt that would be repaid with interest. They did not fight despite their fragility. They fought because of it. They knew exactly how breakable they were, and they chose to stand in the path of danger anyway. The Karathi survived because they were hard to kill. The humans survived because they refused to stop. Vexthal thought about Pete Callahan returning to training with a burned shoulder. He thought about Kate Molina snapping off a blade in her own leg and continuing the mission. He thought about Adam Torres crawling through impossible spaces to make an impossible shot. He thought about all the names in the archives, all the ordinary humans who had done extraordinary things when their backs were against the wall. He thought about Desmond Doss, saving one more life, then one more, then one more. He thought about the defenders of Stalingrad, fighting room by room in the frozen ruins. He thought about the farmers and teachers and grandmothers who had faced the Threll with nothing but determination. And he understood, finally, what he had been looking at all along. The humans were not weak because their bodies could be broken easily. They were strong because their spirits could not be broken at all. They had found a source of power that had nothing to do with natural armor or claws or venom. They had found something deeper, something that came from inside, something that the Karathi had never needed to develop because they had always relied on their physical advantages. The humans called it will. They called it heart. They called it being too stubborn to die. Vexthal remained frozen in the archive room for hours. His body slowly unlocked as the shock faded, but his mind continued to spin. Everything he thought he knew about strength and weakness had been turned upside down. Captain Danny Reyes found him there in the early morning hours. The human captain looked at Vexthal with concern in his eyes. "Commander, are you all right?" Vexthal turned to face him. His movements were stiff, his joints still not quite right. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I have one question." Danny nodded. "Ask it. How do you live with such courage and call it ordinary? How do you do these things and not realize how remarkable they are?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be thinking about the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. When he finally answered, his voice was soft. "We do not call it courage, Commander. We call it Tuesday." Vexthal stared at the human captain. Such a simple answer. such a casual dismissal of something that had shaken Vexthal to his core. The humans didn't think of themselves as remarkable. They simply did what needed to be done, day after day, generation after generation, never stopping, never surrendering, never giving up. It was Tuesday to them. Just another day. Vexthal remained rigid for a very long time after Danny left. He stood alone in the archive room, surrounded by the records of human history, contemplating a species that had looked at a hostile universe and simply refused to be afraid. When he finally left the room, he was not the same being who had entered it. The legendary Karathi commander, veteran of 47 campaigns, had learned something new about the galaxy. He had learned that the soft creatures from a small planet called Earth were not weak at all. They were, quite possibly, the most dangerous species he had ever encountered, and he was honored to serve alongside them.